In today's video, I'm going to be showing how I do maintenance and water changes on all of my basement aquariums. Starting with my two big display tanks, my 180 and my 150 here, I'm going to show how I do water changes and maintenance and all the nuances that come along with it. And then I'm going to show my fish room, how often I do water changes in there and how it differs from the two big display tanks. I have a lot of aquariums down here, so I have to be pretty thoughtful with how I do maintenance. But guys, let's dive right in. Okay, so starting with the 180 gallon aquarium, I have my Python here. I'm going to remove the end piece and connect it to my Cichlid Ultra Zero pump and get this tank draining. I usually do about a 30 to 40% water change on this tank on a weekly basis. What I really like about this pump is that the Python connects directly onto it, so it's perfect connection here. Okay, so then I just open up the lid and put the pump directly in. Then you just plug in the pump itself. You start seeing the water start flowing out of the tank. And as this is happening, that's when I'll disconnect the filters, the heaters, and the wave maker as well. This pump is pushing water through the Python and just directly into the sink. If I didn't have the pump, you would have to be running the water and wasting a lot of water, so the pump makes it much more efficient and saving water. Also, since this is purely tank water draining, I can rinse a lot of my filter media directly here in this sink as the tank is draining, so it's really efficient and can do two things at once. We have the 180 draining right now. I have two canister filters on this tank, a Cichlid Whale 500 and an FX6. I usually clean those about once every 4 to 5 months. I just recently cleaned the FX6, but we'll be cleaning the Cichlid here soon, but won't need to be doing that today. So one of the main questions I get on the two big tanks is how I keep the sand looking so clear if I'm not doing a gravel vac. And there's three main reasons for that. First, the two canister filters do a great job keeping circulation in the tank, along with the wave maker really provides that extra current in the tank that kicks up that debris from the sand, preventing it from settling on the bottom here. And then lastly, in both of these two tanks, I have a lot of geophagus, which constantly sift through the sand looking for uneaten food, also kicking up that debris and then going into the filters. So there's really no need to gravel vac. As you can see, the sand looks spotless. However, in some of my tanks you'll see later, I do a bit of a gravel vac because I don't have geophagus in every tank. But one thing I will do as this 180 gallon acrylic tank is draining is use a shower scrubber to wipe off the panels. I found this to do a really good job of getting the algae off the panels without scratching the acrylic. Okay, so I got the acrylic scrubbed down. The only other two things I do during a water change or maintenance session is to clean off some decor if they have algae on it. I usually only have to do that once every few months. The other thing I will do occasionally is clean the canister filters, but right now I don't need to do that. Overall, pretty simple. Once this guy is drained about 30 to 40%, I'll remove the pump, add the end of the Python back onto it, and then I'll turn the water on to fill it back up. So I just make sure that the tap water going into the tank is roughly the same temperature as the tank water, and then I'll add my dechlorinator as it's filling up. Next, we have my 150 gallon aquarium here, and it's slightly different than the 180 because there are live plants in the tank. The live plants do a great job of keeping the nitrates low, so I don't have to do as much of a water change or as often as I do on the 180. On average, I change about 20% water on this tank every 2 to 3 weeks. I do the same process, I just add the Cichlid Ultra Zero pump. Once I plug in the pump and it starts draining the water, I will turn off the Cichlid wave maker and pump from the sump below using the Cichlid app, which is super simple. This is a glass aquarium, so I don't have to worry too much about the scratching like I do on the acrylic. I just use this flipper magnet and it easily wipes off any algae from the glass. I always like to do that while the tank is draining so that any algae and debris that comes off usually gets sucked up and drained out with the water. And then this tank has a sump, so the one thing I do differently is pull out the filter floss and replace it with new floss each time I do a water change. The biomedia and the filter socks themselves don't need a ton of maintenance on a regular basis. I usually will wash those out once every few months, maybe every 3 or 4 months. And then when the tank is full, that is when I turn the two pumps back on and everything starts running again back from the sump. It's very simple. The live plants are a lifesaver when it comes to water changes. Makes it so much easier when it comes to maintenance and how often you have to do water changes. So next we're going to go into the fish room where the water change schedule and maintenance on each of those tanks is slightly different than the big two tanks. In the fish room we have the 33 gallon shell dweller tank, the 40 gallon breeder, the 75 gallon Peacock Cichlid tank, which you can see is a little dirty, have some work to do on this one, the 10 gallon and the 20. When doing a water change on my 33-gallon Fluval Flex here, the shell dweller tank, I usually just put the normal Python end piece into the tank and let it drain. Since it's not going to be a huge water change, I don't always use the pump in this instance. One thing that is a challenge for all the tanks here in my fish room is that I have to run the Python so far to get to the sink on the other end. I actually bought an extension piece for the Python, so this is about 50 feet of hose that goes all the way to my fish room from the sink. For the shell dweller tank, I usually drain about 30% on a weekly basis. I'll usually wipe down some of the algae on the front panel of the glass, and occasionally I'll wring out the sponge from the all-in-one filter in the back of the tank. Overall, it's pretty simple for the shell dweller tank. I usually don't disturb the substrate. The shell dwellers are always rearranging their shells in the sand, so I just kind of let them be. So once that's complete, then I move down below to the 40-gallon breeder, and this is a little different because it is a cold water aquarium. So you'll see how that comes into play in just a minute. So I'll usually drain about 20 to 30%, maybe every 10 days or so. Again, I'll wipe down the front panel of the glass for any algae, and I'll also scrub off some of the algae from the decor and just let the Python suck that up and out of the tank. One thing to note with all of my aquariums is I try to stagger the water changes as much as possible. Usually I'll do the big 180 on one day, the 150 on a completely separate day every 2 or 3 weeks. And then I'll do the double rack here maybe once a week, but on a different day as the 180, and the other half of the fish room on another day within that week. So overall, I'm usually doing water changes 2 times a week across a variety of different tanks. So when I'm filling up the 40-gallon breeder here, the one difference is that I actually don't turn on the hot water at all. I just fill it up with cool water, since all the fish in here are usually at a temperature anywhere from 65 to 73 degrees. And again, because I have Geophagus species in this tank, I really don't have to sift the sand at all. I just fill it up and it's good to go. So then moving over to my 20-gallon tank here on the ground, eventually I'm going to get a stand for this, but right now it's doing well on the ground. This has my electric blue Acara grow outs. Again, I'll use the regular Python end piece to drain the tank. This will be about a 30% water change on a weekly basis. And because these guys are still so small, I'll just use my hand as kind of a protector to the end of the Python so that it's not sucking up any of the babies during the water change. And then when the tank is drained enough, then I just flip on the water, making sure the temperature is again right at the temperature of the tank. It fills up quickly and we're good to go on the 20-gallon. And then moving over quickly to my 10-gallon tank, I'm not really going to show what's in here right now. There's going to be an update on this tank and the fish very soon, but it's a very similar process. I'll just drain about 30% on a weekly basis. Okay, so last but not least here in my fish room is a 75-gallon Peacock Cichlid tank. And because there are no live plants in here and the cichlids do produce a lot of waste and bioload, the water change percentage is a little higher on a weekly basis. I usually do about 50 to 60% water change weekly for this tank, and I'll also clean out the filter, the hang on the back filter, usually once every 2 weeks. So this is a little more frequent than my other aquariums. Again, because of the type of fish and the lack of plants, it really causes the nitrates to build up quicker and the need for a water change to be more frequent. But again, I'll use the Python to drain the tank to that 50 or 60% mark. I'll wipe down the panel. And ever since I added my Cichlid Wavemaker to this tank about 3 weeks ago, the detritus that used to build up on the sand has really gone away. It definitely shows the value of having great circulation in your tank. Before I had to do a lot of gravel vacuuming in this aquarium just to make sure I got everything off of the sand, but right now there's not much that's accumulating. And then I fill up this tank again, matching the temperature of the water coming in to the tank. I add my Chem Prime, my dechlorinator, as the tank is filling. Turn on the filters again and we're good to go. The one last thing I forgot to mention is that on each of the different tanks I'll just spray some Fritz glass and acrylic cleaner just to wipe off the outside of the tank, making sure I get any smudges or fingerprints off of the front of the panel as well. So that's how I do maintenance and water changes on all my basement aquariums. If you have any questions about the process or any of the tanks that I mentioned today, make sure to leave a comment down below. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.